the lush forests of Markland behind us, we sailed onward to the south. The wind seemed to be telling us, there's a better land waiting for you on the horizon. And finally, we found it! A new continent! A new frontier, full of fruit trees and grassy meadows. A place like that needed a name. So I called it Vinland.
Hi everybody, I meet you today for again a different video format in our very first setup to start our new series of video called Our History with First Nations. Don't worry, we are going on a very long trip this summer again, but before we travel across the lands of Eastern Canada, I wanted to learn more about the history of these lands. And what's best than a Québécois winter to sink into books? So, with Camille, we propose you a historical review in several parts. We are going to talk about the settlement of the continent, the meeting between the First Nations of Canada and the Europeans, and the evolution of their relationship up to the current situation of Indigenous Nations. So, let's go, lean back, we are on board leaving for the New World. First of all, to locate ourselves, I am going to name some cities, some countries and states with their current borders. However, before the European came, there were no such boundaries. The different nations had what I see as predilection lands. By this, I mean that the ones who lived close to the water had developed navigators and angler skills. The ones who lived close to the mountain adjusted to the mountain conditions, and so on. They were, and still are, attached in a more sentimental way to their territories, because they don't define themselves as owners. They are the guardians of their area, of which they use the land and their living beings with respect, so it stays rich for the next generations. Some nations were more sedentary, others more mobile. I also know that some nations or some communities of nations migrated according to the seasons. In this way, I am going to focus my presentation on Quebec and Canada, but my stories will also include the north of the United States because the territory of some nations were expanding across the current borders. Let's begin with the beginning, if we can say so. The oldest human traces on the American continent are dated between 30,000 and 15,000 years before our era. By traces, I mean evidence of human presence with tools, traces of fireplace, footprints. However, the oldest human fossils date from about 12,000 before Christ. There are always new discoveries and debates about a settlement that could have taken place earlier, by individuals arriving with craft from the Pacific. However, the version that we can read the most is that this settlement, or rather these successive settlements, have been possible thanks to an ice age, during which it was then possible to cross the Bering Strait. With the ice melting, the settlement of South Quebec would have begun around 10,000 years before our era. And for the north of the province, as early as 2,500 years before Christ. The population of North America is estimated between 500,000 and 2 million of people when the Europeans arrived. A quite large gap, showing that we don't have enough information before the Europeans and even from the colonization period.
Les longues et dures journées de travail minutieux révélèrent les ruines d'un certain nombre de maisons aux murs de tourbe. À l'intérieur des maisons, ils trouvèrent des cheminées anciennes et autres éléments de conception nettement norroise.
A major discovery in 1960, the remains at Lens-au-Meadow, has allowed to confirm some facts written in the Norse sagas between the 30th and the 40th century. It all began around the year 982, when Eric the Red was sent to exile from Iceland, while his father has already been exiled from Norway before, both for murder. Yeah, you hear well. But fortunately, Eric the Red heard from seamen about a land a little further to the west. And it's on these lands that Eric the Red is going to settle in. Lands that he will name Greenland, so the land which is green, to attract other settlers to come.
Is it really as green as it sounds?
Well, absolutely. At least 2 days here.
Some Scandinavians will live there from notably the trade of the walrus ivory, build several farms and stay there until the beginning of the 15th century. However, in order to trade or build their houses, they need wood. And this is going to motivate Eric the Red's son, better known as Leif Erikson, to continue the exploration toward the west. Around the year 1000, they sailed during 2 days until they reached a country with flat stones, which they called the Eluland, which could match the Baffin Island. Then they passed in front of a long extent of coastal forest, which they called the Markland, the land of the forests, and which could match the Labrador. Finally, venturing further, they arrived on a land where apparently wild wine could grow, and so they called this land the Vinland. Now, those who read the manga Vinland Saga are waking up, and if they don't have them already, understand the author's references. And for those who only watch the anime, yes, I potentially give you some hints for the next seasons. The Vinland could match with Newfoundland and the St. Lawrence Gulf, but it always remains some doubts and uncertainties regarding the true position of this Vinland, because the wines grow naturally more south. There were several establishment colonization attempts. The most important one have been undertaken in 1009 by a rich merchant, Thorfinn Karlsefni.
Is your name Thorfinn Karlsefni?
Thorfinn? What is that surname?
Among his major contributions would be the archaeological vestiges that are at Lens-au-Meadow, dated from 1021. He would probably be the founder of this village, which is the only village where the archaeologists can confirm the Viking origin. He had a son named Snorri Thorfinnsson, the first European born in the New World. Many clues suggest that it should have been other Viking villages along the coast, but nothing concrete for now. In the sagas, the Scandinavians come in direct contact multiple times with the local population and call them Skrælingor, pejorative term that we could translate by savages. What is quite certain is that there have been several conflicts, and that the resistance of the Indigenous Nations is one of the main reasons why the Scandinavians never really settled and finally and definitively left these lands a couple of years later. Apart from the stories, evidence of this contact with First Nations exists. For example, I found on the National Geographic's website that in Vikings' graves in Greenland, an arrowhead have been found in body remains, as well as some furs of buffaloes from America. On the other side, so the side of the First Nations, a coin made during the reign of Olaf III of Norway, dated from the 11th century, have been found on an indigenous excavation site in the Maine, in the USA. Interesting facts, quite significant and not well known. Between the Viking presence, so the Scandinavians, and the official discovery of the New World, the Bretons and the Basques, so peoples who actually lived along the Atlantic Ocean, come to fish in the Saint Lawrence estuary. The Basques would even have installed permanent camps, and they are even going to continue their business in parallel to the establishment of the New France. But we are going to talk about this chapter later in another video. Now we are going to spend a moment on those who have deeply written their names in the history, the great explorers. We are going to see that their narratives, their way of seeing things, or what some authors have written about their adventures has laid the foundation of the common view, and even the concepts that we learn and with which we still grow in our current society. For the upcoming section, I mainly support my words with a book, Ils étaient l'Amérique, so in English, They Were America, from Serge Bouchard and Marie-Christine Lévesque at Lux Editions. I am going to read some parts, so I'm going to give you some translations. There are so many things we didn't learn in history classes. Yet, knowing these characters is really important if we want to understand the origin of some popular widespread pictures. We start strong with the one everybody has inevitably heard about in history classes, the one who truly discovered the America, the famous Christopher Columbus. It is said that he's a bad sailor, a bad fellow, mean, shabby, fraudulent, confabulator, maybe even crazy. But he has an ace in his sleeves. It is said that in his youth, Columbus navigated in the northern seas. From the mouth of cold-water sailors, nameless fishermen, he would have heard stories about huge islands on the Peninsula. These sailors, around 1450, would have taken back the road used by their Viking ancestors 500 years earlier. In addition, this knowledge from the north of Europe, from the Normans, as well as the Scandinavians' Viking saga, are not known in the rest of Europe. The mystery of the lands located above the Sea of Darkness stays complete in the European kingdoms, giving a high value to the information Columbus possessed. The Spanish crown accepts his services because they don't want to be dependent from the Middle East Silk Road anymore, to bring precious products from the Orient to the Occident. This is how Christopher Columbus arrived in October 1492 to the Caribbean archipelago islands, then continue his path towards south. We'll follow the South America colonization by the Spanish. The gold makes them crazy. They slaughter the Aztecs, the Incas, all the indigenous peoples go through. In addition, they are the European brought diseases, which from that time and during centuries will be the worst enemy of the Amerindians. Several expeditions are carried out successively in the first half of the 16th century. The conquistadors tried to break through North America. Mexico, Florida, Georgia, New Mexico, some will reach the current Arizona and Kansas. However, they always finish exhausted, humiliated, desperate by the indigenous that stand up to them, and they will not go further northward. From this first chapter, we will mostly retain a big name mistake. Columbus, because he always thought himself in the silk and cloth country, never had the idea to name the continent under his foot. However, he will have named his inhabitants with a name that reminds how deeply the navigator was stunned, the Indians. We can say that the relations have been more peaceful between the France and the North America, although this was under a lot of trickery. This is what we are going to see in the next video. And yes, it's already over. I hope you will like this first chapter of history. I willingly cut this big chapter about the great explorers in several parts, because the next of them require more attention on his role in the New World. The next video will mainly talk about him. This will be about Jacques Cartier, but also the historical figures among the Indigenous Nations that the history books have too often forgotten. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you like it. I was really looking forward to start this new series about history. I also thank Camille, who will monitor this record and who will take care about the editing. See you soon! Bye!